Violet and Jack had been married for several years, their bond remaining strong through mutual understanding and respect. They rarely argued, always considering each other's feelings, and both had stable jobs that provided them with a comfortable life in their cozy rented apartment. Lately, Violet had been brimming with excitement. A special date was approaching, the anniversary of the day their relationship began. From the beginning, they had agreed that aside from their wedding anniversary, they would celebrate other meaningful milestones in their journey together. A month ago, they had planned a romantic evening for the occasion. Jack was to pick Violet up from work, and together they would head to a restaurant to commemorate the day. On Wednesday morning, Violet woke up in high spirits, eagerly anticipating the evening. The thought of escaping the routine and enjoying a special night with her husband filled her with joy. Jack had already left for work before she had the chance to talk to him, but that was fine, she would see him soon. Throughout the day, she found herself reminiscing about their early days together. Would Jack remember the flowers he had given her on their first date? Which restaurant had he chosen? The anticipation only grew stronger as the end of her shift neared. When the workday was finally over, Violet gathered her things and stepped outside, expecting to see Jack waiting for her. But he was nowhere in sight, with or without a bouquet. She glanced around, confusion creeping in. Minutes passed, and there was still no sign of him. Feeling uneasy, she took out her phone and called him. No answer. She called again. Nothing. On the third attempt, he finally picked up. "Violet, I'm at David's birthday party," Jack said over the loud background music. "He decided to celebrate last minute and called me today. I'll be home late. Don't wait up. Go to bed." Violet's heart sank. He had completely forgotten about their anniversary, the evening they had planned so carefully. She didn't even reply, just hung up. The realization stung. Had their relationship become so unimportant to him? As she stood there, staring at her phone in disbelief, the sky darkened, and heavy rain began to pour, as if nature itself mirrored her emotions. Seeking shelter under the building's canopy, she impatiently hailed a taxi. When the cab finally arrived, she hurried inside, shivering from the cold rain. The driver greeted her cheerfully without turning around. Something about his voice tugged at her memory. As the car moved through the rain-slicked streets, she discreetly glanced at the trip details on her phone. Then her eyes widened in shock. It was Matthew, an old classmate she hadn't seen since 9th grade. "Matthew, I didn't recognize you at first," she exclaimed, suddenly forgetting her disappointment. Matthew turned slightly, recognition dawning on his face. "Violet? Wow, I can't believe it's you." As the car crawled through the evening traffic, they fell into an easy conversation, reminiscing about school days and catching up on lost time. The unexpected reunion warmed her heart, momentarily pushing aside her anger toward Jack. When Matthew suggested they stop by a nearby cafe to continue their conversation, Violet hesitated only briefly before agreeing. After all, no one was waiting for her at home. Hours later, she finally returned to her apartment. Jack was still not back. For the first time in a long while, she felt something other than frustration. She felt excitement. Meeting Matthew again had been refreshing. Back in school, he had been the class heartthrob, someone she had admired from afar but had been too shy to approach. Now, they had talked effortlessly, laughing and sharing stories like old friends. It was past midnight when Jack stumbled in, reeking of alcohol. His movements were clumsy as he fumbled with the door, and when he saw Violet, he slurred something suggestive, reaching for her. Disgust surged through her. Without hesitation, she shoved him away, sending him to the couch in the living room. She turned off the lights and climbed into bed, feeling a deep, aching disappointment. The following days saw a subtle but definite change. Matthew began calling her regularly, inviting her for walks after work. She found herself looking forward to their meetings, cherishing the warmth and attention he gave her, things that had become absent in her marriage. When she and Jack got into another argument, it only fueled her growing attachment to Matthew. Soon, their once innocent meetings took on a different tone. It was no longer just friendly conversations over coffee or casual strolls in the park. There was something more, a connection that neither could ignore. Violet began staying later at work, using the excuse of a busy reporting period. Every evening, she took a taxi home, her heart filled with emotions she hadn't felt in years. And Jack? He didn't suspect a thing. Here's your rewritten passage with more detail and a smoother flow. Jack had never suspected anything unusual until one evening when he noticed something strange. As he gazed out the window, a troubling detail caught his attention. For the second consecutive day, the taxi that dropped his wife, Violet, home had the exact same license plate. In a city teeming with thousands of vehicles, what were the odds of that? His gut told him this wasn't just a coincidence. When Violet walked in, casually kicking off her shoes, Jack didn't greet her as usual. Instead, he got straight to the point. "Who's been driving you home every day?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with suspicion. "I've seen the same taxi for 2 days in a row." "Who is it?" Violet barely reacted. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate. Instead, she coolly met his gaze and shrugged. "Jack, I think your memory is failing you. Maybe you should get that checked out." Her voice was calm, dismissive, as if the idea itself was absurd. Then, just like that, she moved on, acting as if the conversation was over. Jack, however, wasn't convinced. The unease gnawed at him all night, and by morning, his resolve had hardened. He needed to know the truth. That evening, instead of waiting at home, he drove to Violet's office early and parked at a discreet distance, watching. At exactly 6 p.m., the time she always claimed to be staying late at work, the same car pulled up. Jack tensed, his hands gripping the steering wheel as he watched his wife exit the building, smiling as she walked straight toward the car. There was no hesitation, no urgency, no sign of a woman rushing home from overtime. She was relaxed, comfortable. And then, she slid into the front seat. Gotcha, Jack thought, his heart pounding. Determined, he started his car and followed them. The driver didn't head in the direction of their home. Instead, the car weaved through the city streets before taking a turn onto a quieter road. As dusk settled, they left the bustling streets behind and drove toward a secluded park near the edge of a forest, an area that was deserted in the evenings. Jack parked at a distance and got out, his pulse hammering in his ears. Keeping low, he approached carefully, slipping behind a tree that gave him a clear view of the car. What he saw next shattered any last bit of doubt. Inside the vehicle, Violet and the driver were locked in an embrace. Jack's stomach twisted as he watched his wife lean in, their lips meeting in a slow, deliberate kiss. The driver pushed his seat back, and without hesitation, Violet climbed onto his lap, hands moving to undo his shirt. That was it. The breaking point. Jack stormed forward, his rage blinding him. He yanked the car door open, grabbed his stunned wife, and pulled her out, shoving her aside. Then, he turned his fury toward the man who had just been with her. His fists flew, one after the other, each punch landing harder than the last. The driver barely had time to react before he was on the receiving end of Jack's unrelenting wrath. It took Violet a moment to process what was happening, but when she did, she screamed, "Jack, stop! Someone help!" But there was no one around. Her desperate cries echoed through the emptiness of the park. After a few more punishing blows, Jack finally stepped back, his chest heaving. He turned his gaze to Violet, his expression unreadable, his voice cold and final. "Your things will be outside. Don't even think about coming home." Violet, still trembling, opened her mouth as if to say something, maybe to beg, maybe to explain. But she didn't. She knew. She had crossed a line she couldn't uncross. The divorce was swift, just as promised. By the time she returned to their home, her belongings were already stuffed into garbage bags, sitting by the entrance like discarded trash. She tried reaching out in the days that followed, calling, messaging, even showing up unannounced. But Jack never responded. The damage was done. And so, just like that, the life she had taken for granted was gone.